Hello and welcome to the Transfers podcast, powered by FootballTransfers.com, where we bring you news, insight and analysis on that most important of the least important things, football. I am Ronan Murphy, as always, and I'm delighted to be back with Duncan Castles on the show. Welcome, Duncan.
Good to see you again, Ronan, the man formerly known as the Carlo Charmer before you blotted your copybook a couple of weeks ago.
Well, I can't be expected to be perfect all the time. I can be perfect some of the time. I thought I was wrong once in the past, but it turns out I was mistaken.
Does that go down well with your wife, that explanation of events?
No, as married people know, you are always wrong and she is always right. Yeah. So thanks for listening, love. But on more pressing matters, we have a month left until the Premier League transfer window closes. 7 p.m. in 1 month's time. So I'm sure you're all counting down the clocks. You get ChatGPT to work out exactly how many minutes that is from the time you're listening to this episode of the podcast. So today we're going to spend most of our time concentrating on the business end of the pitch and talk about strikers and goalkeepers. But before that, something to do if in your spare time over the weekend is to fill in our audience survey. And regular listeners obviously will be bored of hearing about us talk about the audience survey, but we need to hit a certain target of survey results so to get reliable data. So keep answering it, put in a different name. And if you're listening, I at the start of the show, my wife is still listening. She'll know to put in more Ronan on the show, please. Thanks very much. The link, as always, is in the show notes and on our social media. Why don't we get cracking with the biggest team with the most passionate support, as they would say themselves, Manchester United. We will get cracking with Man United. They are looking for a striker, and the striker they're being linked with at the moment is Benjamin Šeško.
Yeah, Sean Connery's favourite footballer. Look, it's really interesting that this is where Manchester United have decided to go, having looked at a lot of the centre forwards on the market, having failed to convince Viktor Gyökeres that he should reunite with Ruben Amorim and seen him go to Arsenal. They have also made inquiries for Ollie Watkins at Aston Villa, and decided that the £50 million minimum asking price from Aston Villa for a player who will turn 30 years of age in December is too high. Even though, as I understand it, there would be a potential deal with Aston Villa to be done involving one of their bomb squad members, Alejandro Garnacho. Interesting that they passed on Watkins, because Watkins is pretty much guaranteed currency in the Premier League. 50 goals in 112 Premier League games over the last 3 seasons. Scored a goal every 163 minutes of Premier League football last season, which is actually the best rate of his entire career in all leagues. So he's improved as he's gone on down the line. But Manchester United, even though they've been very analytics driven in the recruitment this summer, we've talked about how they've gone for 2 of the best analytic performers in the division, and Matheus Cunha and Brian Mbeumo in the 2 forward signings who are expected to line up behind this new centre forward. They are in this case going for someone outside the Premier League, someone who has been seen as potentially one of the elite strikers in the future, has been looked at as a major promise for many years, and someone who is understood to be accessible for a fee of around 80 to 90 million euros, having signed a new contract with Leipzig last summer, following extensive interest from Arsenal. There's understood to be an arrangement with Leipzig that if an elite club, by the player's own definition, comes in for him, he would be allowed to leave at around that fee. There's a real direct history at Manchester United with Sesko, in that the Slovenian international arrived in the Red Bull system initially at Salzburg, having been scouted by Christopher Vivell who is currently United's director of recruitment. Had a short period at Chelsea, fell out with the American owners, left, taken on by Manchester United last season. Vivell moved on to become the sports director, the technical director at Leipzig. And at Leipzig brought Sesko from Salzburg to the Bundesliga club. He's had 2 seasons there. He scored 33 Bundesliga and Champions League goals in 80 games. And again, looking at analytics, he's radically overperformed his XG, his expected goals, in the Bundesliga in those 2 seasons for Leipzig, scoring 25 non-penalty goals from 16.1 XG. I think another element to mention here is that, as well as it clearly being the case that Vivell is pushing hard for a player whose career he's had a long interest in and has a very good relationship with the player and his representatives, which should make the deal more easy for United to do. They face competition here from Newcastle United, who we'll discuss later, will certainly have the budget to go head to head with Manchester United on transfer fee. But they're essentially taking a player who's in the same category as Gyökeres. And we know Amorim wanted Gyökeres as his first choice for centre forward. So the club is kind of saying, you wanted this type of striker, we'll go for someone of a similar dimension. And something else I would note is that you can look at the Premier League at present. You have Arsenal, Mikel Arteta bringing Gyökeres in. You have obviously Erling Haaland at Manchester City with Pep Guardiola, and now you've got Amorim and Vivell pushing to bring Šeško in to Amorim's system. Now, all 3 of those coaches very much play positional football, and what you could have is a scenario where all 3 of them are working with kind of these battering ram, very quick forwards at the top of their tactical system. And we'll see how well each of them do. Now, you, Ronan, watch a lot of Bundesliga football. You know Šeško well. What do you think about this move from Manchester United's perspective? Does this strike you as being a good fit to Amorim and a good fit to the Premier League?
I think it kind of goes back to what I would have said about Xerxes before Man United bought Xerxes, that this was kind of a player that maybe has shone a little at his current club, and then when he comes into Manchester United, he's going to find a steep learning curve. And I think the same is going to happen with Šeško if he does move to Manchester United, because he's not the finished product, and Man United have been going through these forwards that aren't quite the finished product and being frustrated by these products that aren't quite the finished product. And I think the same is going to happen with him, and that's probably why he wasn't plan A for Arsenal and he wasn't plan A for other clubs, and why he's now going to a club that isn't playing Champions League football. I know Leipzig obviously aren't playing European football themselves this season, but that was their hope, and I think it was his hope probably to go somewhere that would be kind of showcasing his talents on the biggest stage. But he probably doesn't have that market necessarily as a plan A for most of these clubs, because, like you said, he overperformed his XG, and we see that from when players come from a league and go to maybe a stronger, more competitive league, that their XG, their goals kind of reverses to where it should be. And you'll probably see that with Gyökeres, and you've definitely seen it with Darwin Núñez in the past. So I think you're going to see a lot of that. And when you look at the way Šeško has played the last season for Leipzig, a lot of the burden of goal scoring was put on his shoulders, and he wasn't really able to carry that. And you've seen it at times for Slovenia. He has a great international record, obviously, and he has 16 international goals in 41 international games. But if you look at a lot of those goals, a quarter of those have come against Kazakhstan, a hat-trick in one game. He scored against the likes of Northern Ireland and San Marino, Malta. He hasn't really scored against top international teams in the games he's played there either. If you look at, I think, the full list of 16 goals he scored, I wouldn't say any of those teams that he scored against are in the top 20 in the world. He isn't a player who has kind of shown that he can do it against the best teams in the biggest moments. We saw at the previous Euros, so for Slovenia, he had a huge chance for Slovenia, but he kind of snatched at it. He wasted a massive opportunity to send Slovenia through, and I think a lot has been put on his shoulders at international level, but a lot was put on it at Leipzig, and he struggled at times with the burden of that. And we all know what Manchester United is like, what the kind of the media attention that you will get as a striker for Manchester United. We've seen it with Hjulmand last season, how he was under pressure. It looked to be weighing down on him at times, and I think the same could happen with Šeško. I think he's going to be one of these players that people will point to and look at when you buy a striker from the Bundesliga. This is what happens, and I think because maybe he doesn't have the tools yet. I think he's still very raw. He could be, like you said, one of the best number 9s in the world, but he just isn't there yet. And I'm not sure if Manchester United is the club where you're allowed time or given a chance to develop those tools.
You mentioned Xerxes and Hjulmand. The two centre forward signings in the past 2 summers for Manchester United, 17 Premier League goals between them from a total of 94 Premier League appearances between the two of them. If we start by looking at the analytics that SciSports deliver for us, we'll talk about the estimated transfer value that comes in at 69.6 million euros, which is below what that agreed number between Šeško and Leipzig is. The kind of performance analytics show him up as being one of the quickest strikers in the Bundesliga, and one of the best headed and close range finishers in the German league. What he's not great at is passing the ball, and his ball retention is poor. Now, if you go to kind of broader elements, there's questions over his decision making, the point at which he decides to shoot rather than pass to his teammates. And interesting, and I always find these the most valuable assessments when you're talking about a transfer of this type, which is key to Manchester United. It's going to be a huge investment, whoever they take it at centre forward. Asking a couple of sports directors, one in particular who looked at signing Šeško when he was a teenager, met the player in person, and asking him what he thought about Sesko as a fit to Manchester United, and his view was he does not have the mentality to be an elite striker. He's super talented, he has lots of promise, but he has not delivered on that promise at Leipzig. And his view, having spoken to the player, was that he doesn't have the drive that the real elite forwards have, that someone like Haaland has. And this is an individual who spoke to Haaland before he moved on in his career to top European clubs. And his view is, if you do not have that at that level of the game, you never reach the very top. Now, he could be wrong, and other people could be wrong about this, but it does strike me as a high risk move, this one, particularly for the reasons you mentioned, which is we know that Manchester United is a difficult place for players to develop the level of attention upon them. And if there's a question over a player's mentality in those circumstances, then that's just going to serve to increase the risk.
Yeah, it is probably one of the hardest places to go. Obviously, there's huge clubs around the world. Real Madrid, a lot of pressures on players that go there. But Manchester United, from the English market, is always the one that sells newspapers. My father-in-law often talks about any time that he gets the newspaper he reads, and there's always, every day there seems to be 2 pages in it on Manchester United. These are the team. This is the team that everybody loves, or everybody loves to talk about, or everybody loves to hate. And yeah, Šeško, if he does move there, there's just going to be so much pressure on them, and yeah, you kind of wonder how a player of his talent or a player of his mentality will manage that. And like I said, you can see it when you watch him. You know that this guy could be a top striker. He has all the tools there. It's just sometimes his decision making lets him down. He gets frustrated with himself and then he kind of can ghost in and out of matches. But when he's on his game, he can be a superstar, and he could be a superstar at Manchester United. It's just the doubts are there if they will give him the time, and maybe if he will give himself the time to succeed.
And I think in the background of all of this, when we're looking at why Manchester United have chosen to go down this route, another player they've asked about, Randal Kolo Muani, who Paris Saint-Germain are trying to sell at present, who Juventus would like to retain, having had him on loan for the second half of last season, but have yet to come up with the financial terms to satisfy PSG on that deal. Newcastle United also involved in inquiries for Kolo Muani, and it is possible we could see one of those two clubs ends up with Sesko and the other one end up with Kolo Muani. But I think there's a fascinating question about what's going on with Newcastle United's best player, Alexander Isak, in that we seem to have a situation at present where you've got one of the 10 most valuable footballers in the world. Again, let's look at SciSports estimated transfer values. Isak comes in at 9th in the entire gamut of footballers playing in world football at present, with an estimated transfer value of 116.1 million euros. He is the third highest value player in the Premier League on that metric. And there's a consensus, I think, that he is one of the top striking talents, and certainly one of the top striking talents delivering in recent seasons. 21 goals from 30 Premier League games in 2023-24 season, and 23 and 34 last season. And at a peak age in his mid-20s to move, obviously ready to deliver the same performance at another Premier League club. Why Newcastle have got themselves into a situation where you have that talent and there only seems to be one bidder for the player at present, in that Liverpool, as we detailed on the podcast last week, made an approach to Newcastle United before signing Ugo Ekitike, who Newcastle United wanted themselves, and suggested or floated a transfer fee of about £120 million. Liverpool have now turned that into a formal transfer offer for the Sweden international, which has been rejected by Newcastle United. Again, we talked about this a lot on the two pods last week. Newcastle United have gotten themselves into a situation where Eddie Howe had to talk about why Isak wasn't playing in the first pre-season friendly against Celtic, and was unable, when questioned, to guarantee that Isak would remain as a Newcastle United player. He subsequently elected not to go on their pre-season tour. The story was that he had a hamstring injury, and Newcastle were saying that the long distance travel could have aggravated that hamstring injury. Therefore, he'd been left off the tour. Obviously, everyone now knows it's because Isak refused to go on the tour, has asked to be allowed to leave the club, and is actually training with his former club, Real Sociedad, at the moment. He wants to go to Liverpool. Personal terms are agreed there. It's a question of whether Newcastle United will accept a fee for a player who they insist they do not want to sell, and who they insist they would like to get on a new contract. Over the last few days, details have come out about those discussions over a contract, and it's an incredible story in that conversation started over a year ago, when Amanda Staveley was still at Newcastle United. Isak and his camp were open to that discussion. Then we had the famous profit and sustainability regulation fire sale at the end of June last year, when Newcastle were hawking most of their top players, not Isak, but most of their top players around Europe, desperately trying to raise money to allow themselves to stay within the Premier League's financial fair play regulations. Newcastle brought in a new director of football, Paul Mitchell, and the understanding is that Paul Mitchell called a halt to those contract talks, and they went through the entirety of last season with no discussion with Isak. Isak obviously missing out on potentially millions of extra salary had he come to an agreement on a pay rise early in the season. And now the brief from the Isak camp is they're upset with Newcastle for not having those discussions and not trying to tie him down in that period. So I think there's some errors there, but I think there's also, for me, there's a fundamental error in the way Newcastle United have handled this, in that they must have known there were problems with the player. They must have known there was the potential for this forced sale coming up. Yet they're now in a position where Arsenal, who were long admirers of Isak, are off the market, having signed Gyökeres. And as far as I can understand it, they have not made an attempt to explore other clubs they could at least allow Isak to be offered to try and extract more cash from Liverpool, if that's to be the player's choice of the club he wants to go to. It really is very odd that you have a player of this value in this scenario in his career, and it looks at present as though it's going to be a slam dunk for Liverpool, and they just have to negotiate the fee with Newcastle to get their man.
Yeah, it seems a bit crazy that there aren't alternatives out there for what obviously is one of the best strikers in the world. In this episode, we've talked a lot about strikers so far, and over the summer so far, we've spoken a lot about strikers in various episodes and the demand for them, and there's so few of them out there, so few of them with the kind of the guaranteed goals that Isak could bring you, because we talked about Šeško earlier, and he has a high ceiling, like I was saying, but he also has a low floor. But I think Isak has a high floor and a high ceiling. He's a player that's going to give you everything kind of every week, and it seems bizarre that there isn't a huge bidding war for essentially one of the top strikers in the world at the moment. And yeah, just playing into Liverpool's hands that they're going to get what they want this summer. And yeah, I'm going to be very interested to see how Ekitike and Isak fit into the one team going forward for Liverpool.
Well, look, Liverpool have this past week, they've raised 70 million euros guaranteed, selling a 28-year-old Luis Diaz to Bayern Munich, which gives them, again, as Jonathan Northcroft explained on one of last week's pod, helps give them the firepower to do this. We mentioned Arsenal would have been a potential buyer for Isak. Chelsea have bought 2 centre forwards this summer and would surely have been a potential buyer. And then there's the question mark of, could you draw Manchester United into that race? We've just spent several minutes discussing how Manchester United are now in a position where they are going for a player of obvious talent, but big question marks over whether you'll be able to translate that talent into being an elite striker of the nature of Isak, a kind of guaranteed producer up front. And here they have, potentially, you could have Manchester United having the option, instead of going for another gamble in the way they did with Hjulmand and Xerxes, to buy, or to try and buy, that top talent, to try and outbid Liverpool for him, or at least you would think make the process of Liverpool acquiring one of the top strikers in the Premier League more difficult, add a bit of extra money to the fee. But the guidance I have from Manchester United is that they have decided against bidding for Isak because the cost of his transfer fee and his salary is too high. Which again makes you ask questions, not just about Newcastle United. Why aren't they trying to push the player and trying to build that bidding war. But have Manchester United made the right calculation there in spending what will be a substantial amount of money on a possible top talent, as opposed to going all out and trying to get the best available individual in the market when he has placed himself upon the market?
Yeah, I suppose we're used to Manchester United maybe cutting corners and letting staff of various departments go. So not deciding to spend the most money on the top talent in the market shouldn't really come as a surprise with the way they've operated over the last couple of years.
That's true, Ronan.
Yeah. If he threw in some extra sausages for the barbecue when he was coming along or something, or some new cutlery for the canteen, if there was some sort of option where Manchester United, if they made a bid to Newcastle, that they could get something else, maybe some office furniture or something from Newcastle, then they might be more willing to do it if they could save money that way. So Newcastle can keep hold of their canteen staff for another while, but they might be able to keep hold of Alexander Isak. But I think someone that they are looking at is Wissa at Brentford. He could be an option for them to bring in. He's obviously shone last season for them, so I think he could be another one that could shine elsewhere if he was to move on from the exodus that's happening at Brentford at the moment.
Yeah, look, it very, very difficult summer for Brentford, and they lost Thomas Frank, most of the coaching staff, forced to sell Brian Mbeumo, although they extracted a very high fee to Manchester United. And also, it looks like, it's not definitive, but it looks like they're going to lose Yoane Wissa as well, who almost scored as many goals as Mbeumo, 19 Premier League goals last season, the sixth highest return of any player in the Premier League, and just 4 less than Isak himself, but out of contract in 2026, turns 29 in September. Newcastle United are offering him what's been described as life-changing money. He's made it very clear, I understand, to Brentford that he wants to leave, and will push for that move. Brentford have been in this scenario a few times, not just with Mbeumo, but also with Ivan Toney last year. And I think the calculation they have to make is, if they force Wissa to play out the last year of his contract, at what level will he perform? And if they don't, can they get a replacement in who delivers the amount of goals that Wissa close to guarantees, which they will require, I think, if they're to remain in the Premier League. This is shaping up to be a difficult season, a much harder season to retain your Premier League status, with Leeds United and Sunderland both investing heavily, and Leeds United coming up with a relatively strong squad to start with, regardless of that extra investment on top. So it is a tough position for them, and Newcastle are well placed to take the player if they can come to an agreement with Brentford over fee. My understanding is that Brentford will be looking for a very high transfer fee. Again, they'll set a high mark for this, perhaps as high as £50 million for the player, and they'll argue that on the basis of what he's delivered in the Premier League and benchmark it against other players that have been sold in the division or transferred into the division this summer. Also understand there might be interest in the player from Nottingham Forest, so it could be that there's 2 or even more candidates within the Premier League trying to take the player as we get into those final weeks of the window, and the pressure ratchets up on Brentford to make a decision on this one.
Yeah, it feels like it's going to be a long season for Brentford, and like you said, the teams that have come up from the Championship, in other seasons we might expect the teams that have come up to go straight back down, but it doesn't look likely that that's going to happen, and some of these teams that we've seen in the Premier League kind of as mainstays for the last few years are going to be dragged into that relegation battle, and that will probably make for a more entertaining season and more entertaining football, and especially for the neutrals. But if you're a fan of a team like Brentford, it's the last thing you want to see is your club stripped of its assets and the manager go, the coaching staff to leave, a lot of your favourite players probably to see. It's kind of disappointing, but that is the dog-eat nature of the Premier League and top tier football now, that this is what's going to happen.
Look, the Brentford have been a club with a lot of stability and planning, and they've had a lot of that stripped away from them in one go. I don't think anyone would have expected this all to happen in one summer. Your two highest scorers and your coach and most of his coaching staff and the guy you had brought in, Justin Cochrane, into the setup and groomed him to be the successor, deciding to go with Thomas Frank as an assistant. And it's not just losing the coaching staff from the perspective of what they do to lead the team. When you get a scenario like Wissa asking to leave, and you want, in an ideal world, you would want to persuade him to stay or at least come to some kind of compromise. Losing the guy he's worked with as a coach and who has, by all accounts, superb personal skills, and Thomas Frank, it just takes another weapon away in that art of persuasion. Frank would have had the best relationship with Wissa and might have had a chance of convincing him to give it one more season or possibly sign a new contract. I'm not saying that can't happen now, but it's obviously going to be much harder for Keith Andrews with a shorter history and no history as being the main man, to use the human touch to persuade the player to make a decision in Brentford's favour.
Yeah, if you've been there for a while and you have a project going on, you can show the players exactly what to expect, and you can say that if you stick here, this is what's going to happen, and you know and trust the person that's telling you this. And if someone new, you have to believe in kind of what they are offering. And we saw when Florian Wirtz decided on Liverpool over Bayern Munich that's what his father came out and said after, that Wirtz and the family had a talk to the manager of Liverpool, the manager of Bayern Munich, and they preferred what Arne Slot had to say than Vincent Kompany. There was obviously other reasons for the transfer, but that was a part of the deciding factor, was that Vincent Kompany's, obviously his plan for the future wasn't as strong as Arne Slot, and that doesn't come as a surprise. And it's going to be hard for someone like Keith Andrews to convince players to play for him, because he doesn't have anything to point at. Look at what I've done before. He doesn't really have an Ange Postecoglou, in my second season I win things. He hasn't even had a first season to show he can do anything yet. So it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of manage these outgoing transfers, but also how they can convince players to come and play for them. So before we move on to goalkeepers, we have a midfielder to look at, and it's someone that Manchester United, if they could get him at the price they want, all their Christmases might come all at once.
Yeah, I understand from information in Portugal that Ruben Amorim has been attempting to bring his former Sporting player, Morten Hjulmand, to Manchester United to strengthen up his midfield. He's Sporting's captain, has been for the last season. A fast box-to-box midfielder who's had 2 excellent campaigns in Lisbon, winning the Portuguese title twice. And Amorim rates him so highly. He at one point, when he was coach of Sporting, praised Hjulmand as being a more complete player than João Palhinha, who'd been central to Amorim's first title-winning side. And incidentally, it looks like he's on his way back to the Premier League, with Tottenham agreeing a loan with Bayern Munich for the Portugal midfielder. I think, similar to Gyökeres, this is a very difficult deal for Manchester United to do, not because the player wants to go elsewhere, as was the case with Gyökeres. My understanding is the player would like to move to the Premier League, and that his representatives are pushing Sporting to allow him to go at what they consider to be a reasonable price of about 50 million euros. Sporting don't have any necessity whatsoever, any financial need to sell more players because of the money they took on Gyökeres, and also the big deal they did for Giovanni Kenda to Chelsea earlier in the year. So they have simply referred suitors to the release clause in Hjulmand's contract, which is 80 million euros. I do not see Manchester United having the wherewithal to pay the release clause for the 26-year-old. His estimated transfer value is very high for a player from the Portuguese league at 54.9 million euros, which gives you an indication of the level of his talent. Obviously, it would be a great acquisition for Amorim if he could make it happen, because he'd be getting a player he knows and trusts, knows what he's capable of doing, who knows his system inside out. But that one looks very difficult for United to do.
Yeah, like you said, it's a player that Amorim knows very well, and I think they kind of both were there at the one time, and Amorim brought Hjulmand to Sporting. He was the coach the season before, and he was the coach when he brought him. So he knows the kind of player he's had influence in bringing him to Sporting and seeing him succeed at Sporting, because I know before he played for Lecce, and he was kind of regarded as a kind of rising player, but I think he's developed into the player he is, and the kind of all-round midfielder that we see him today, or defensive midfielder that could really help Manchester United. It's sometimes where they're kind of lacking in the middle of the park, and it could make a huge difference for them. And they have been, obviously, I came up with my memories that Man United were looking for a new look midfield in an episode that we had exactly 1 year ago today. So yeah, it seems that the same problem is happening for Manchester United. So yeah, he would be a great fix for them in midfield. But like you said, 80 million is a lot of money that Man United aren't currently spending on anybody.
Yeah, Amorim in combination with Hugo Viana, who is now the sporting director at Manchester City. And yes, you make a fair point. Every summer, Manchester United seem to be looking in almost every position for replacement. And I guess that brings us on to goalkeepers and Gianluigi Donnarumma, who we flagged up to you on the podcast in May, could be coming on the market this summer because Paris Saint-Germain wanted to tie him to a new contract, wanted to avoid any possibility of leaving the club as a free agent in a year's time, when his current contract, which pays 10 million euros net a year, would expire. We told you then that Internazionale were monitoring the situation and had made it clear to Donnarumma that they'd like to bring him back to Italy. We've gone through the negotiation process with you, and it has now got to the stage where Paris Saint-Germain have signed a new goalkeeper. Not formally completed, but they know they will be getting Lucas Chevalier from Lille, a deal worth 40 million euros in transfer fee. He will join in a 5-year contract at less than half the salary cost of Donnarumma. Chevalier also targeted by Newcastle United and Aston Villa. He's been Lille's starting goalkeeper since 2022. He was the Ligue 1 goalkeeper of the year last season, interestingly, ahead of Gianluigi Donnarumma. 12 clean sheets in 44 Ligue 1 and Champions League appearances. Now, the interesting thing here is that during these discussions between Donnarumma and Paris Saint-Germain through the summer, Donnarumma had told the club he had other options. And at a certain point, he said he did not want to stay at Paris. Now that PSG have bought a new goalkeeper, he's telling Paris that he would prefer to stay at the club, and he will consider staying and leaving the club under freedom of contract in a year's time. That's the guidance I have. PSG are understandably unhappy about that. Information I have is that they have told Donnarumma they will not let him run down his deal and leave on the free transfer in the same style he did with Milan. Now, the threat they made to him is if he tries to do that, he will be the reserve goalkeeper, that Luis Enrique will play Chevalier as his starter and will play him throughout the season. And I think there is a certain degree of power to that threat. I don't think it is empty, in that Enrique has asked for and supported the move for Chevalier, because Chevalier is a much better goalkeeper with the ball at his feet, a better passer of the ball, and obviously a very good fit to the tactical system Enrique uses. And it's going to be, whatever happens, it's going to be an interesting exercise to observe PSG and see if the quality of their attacking play, the quality of their passing play takes another step up with Chevalier at the back instead of Donnarumma. I think it's questionable as to whether Chevalier is a better shot-stopping goalkeeper than Donnarumma. But the consensus is that he is better on the deck, and maybe that is better for the overall play of the team. But we're now in a position where I think Barca are fairly calm about this. They see what Donnarumma is doing as trying to reduce his transfer fee and trying to organise conditions under which he can leave, where most of the money spent on his transfer, i.e. the total package to the new club, goes towards his salary and signing on fee rather than the transfer fee. So PSG see it as a bit of a game that Donnarumma is playing, and they expect him to agree to move to another club, and they expect to get a transfer through during the window. They are aware that Manchester United are interested in the player. My understanding is that Manchester United have not formally contacted Paris Saint-Germain, and there's no transfer offer at present. PSG also expect Chelsea to get involved in that discussion, and possibly Manchester City. So we have one of the top goalkeepers in world football on the market, and in a game of chicken with his current club over what the fee will be, and still very young at 26, still clearly a prime asset. Guidance I have from people in Italy who know him well, they say this could be harder for Paris Saint-Germain than they expect, and they note the stubbornness of the player. They note the way he forced a free transfer from Milan to go to Paris Saint-Germain, and they reckon that even if he is forced to stay in the squad for a season while he waits for freedom of contract, he will just batten down the hatches and try and prove that he's a better goalkeeper than Chevalier, and try and force Enrique to play him at some point. And they say that they've seen him do it before with Keylor Navas at PSG.
If I was him, I wouldn't. I would just sit on the bench and earn my big money, because never mind the reserve goalkeeper, the third goalkeeper is the dream job of anybody who's in and around football. Imagine just being Scott Carson for a living. That sounds the dream, and you get to celebrate the medals and get the money, and yeah. But I'm not sure he is the sort of personality, like you said, that would allow that to happen. He has shown form for it in the past, that he is a strong character, a huge personality on and off the football field, and he will be determined to prove he's the best, even if PSG hadn't had signed someone that they consider to be their longer term number one. Because I think Chevalier, you can see why they're going with that approach, because he is obviously more a new type goalkeeper, whereas Donnarumma is more an old school sort of goalkeeper. And I think that's why PSG maybe succeeded in the Champions League last season, because they had Donnarumma, and when things did go awry for them, when counter-attacks did happen or when PSG lost possession, they could count on him to keep the ball out of the net. Maybe he couldn't dispatch it to the defenders with the same kind of ability that some other goalkeepers had, but the main responsibility of a goalkeeper is always to stop the goals going to the net, and that's what he was doing, and that's what he did in huge moments in their Champions League campaign, and he was crucial to them winning it. So you can see why he is so in demand, why he's been linked with the clubs that he's been linked with. And it's just kind of, it would be funny if he ended up at Manchester United, because they went from David De Gea, an old school shot stopper, they tried to move on to a ball playing goalkeeper, and Donnarumma to be moving back to an old school shot stopper. So yeah, it would be a kind of a bitter irony for David De Gea looking on if that were to happen.
Yeah, and look, a very expensive deal for Manchester United to do. I understand the interest there and the ambition involved in taking player who's just won the Champions League with PSG. You cannot argue with the quality of his goalkeeping over the last season. He was an exceptional. One interesting point in that, and something we brought up on the podcast, was he greatly improved his ability in the air. He became not quite dominant in aerial aspects of goalkeeping, but he became very strong and reliable where he hadn't been in the past. And the irony of that is that Luis Enrique's coaching team spent a lot of work getting him to perform in that way, particularly to defend corner kicks and free kicks, which they felt was the real Achilles heel of the team the previous season. So they probably done a lot of work to prepare him for the Premier League, if that's in fact where he ends up moving to post Paris Saint-Germain.
Yeah, the clubs you mentioned, obviously you mentioned Chelsea and Man City was someone that we covered a few weeks ago on the podcast as someone who were interested in, but someone who also, as you quite rightly said, were in the market for James Trafford, and that's where he's ended up this week, and he's become a big signing for them. They used their buyback clause to get him, and yeah, it kind of shakes up the goalkeeper room there, I think, a bit.
Yeah, look, another failure for Newcastle United. The James Trafford is a player they've been trying to sign for over a year. Multiple attempts to take him from Burnley last season. Trafford actually went to Chairman Alan Pace and asked to be allowed to leave the club, and Pace told him, "You will not be allowed to leave the club until Newcastle United pay the money we think you're worth." And they've got that money in the end. They've got above the figure they were asking last season after they headed down to the Championship. Partly, of course, because Trafford had an exceptional season in the Championship, breaking all kinds of records. Burnley announced it as a record transfer fee for a British goalkeeper, surpassing the £30 million that Everton paid for Jordan Pickford. City were briefing that the transfer fee is £27 million plus bonuses, so a little bit of debate between the two clubs there as to what the actual fee was, but no question that what happened was Newcastle United put an offer in. Manchester City were informed of the offer, as is the structure of these deals, where they have sold academy players to English clubs and put buyback options in, and they asked Trafford where he would prefer to go. He decided he would rather go back to Manchester City than join Newcastle United, and the matching rights on the Newcastle offer were exercised, and Trafford is there. We told you that Manchester City are open to selling, and Pep Guardiola in particular are open to selling Ederson this summer. 1 year left in his contract, and Ederson very close to moving to the Saudi Pro League last summer, only for Manchester City to reject the transfer fees being offered, as they felt they weren't substantial enough for a player of his calibre. Again, this is an interesting one to observe as to whether Guardiola considers Trafford ready to be the starting goalkeeper for Manchester City. We know how important that position is in the way his teams play. Trafford obviously had a very difficult season in the Premier League with Burnley, but being at Burnley exposes you to a totally different type of threat against your goal than you would expect at City.
It has kind of changed everything again for Newcastle, and they're signing another player who, when people saw it on social media, they were thinking that Newcastle's transfer window couldn't get any worse, and it just keeps continuing bad to bad. And yeah, Aaron Ramsdale, nothing against Aaron Ramsdale as a person, but I'm not sure it's what Newcastle fans wanted from a marquee goalkeeping signing.
Look, it's interesting the perspective supporters take of these deals, and yeah, it's difficult to take a player who is seen to be on his way down. He was Arsenal's starting goalkeeper. Mikel Arteta decided he wasn't good enough with his feet for the kind of game he wanted to play, and put a lot of effort and a substantial amount of cash into bringing David Raya to the club, and rapidly put Raya in Ramsdale's starting slot. Ramsdale was then sold to Southampton for £25 million last summer, relegated straight back down to the Championship, and Ramsdale wanted to remain a Premier League player, understandably, and Southampton have had to allow him to go to Newcastle in what doesn't look like a very clever financial deal for them, given the fee they paid last summer, in that it's a loan deal, albeit with a substantial loan fee, and no obligation to buy at the end of the season. Newcastle have an option to take Ramsdale on the permanent transfer, but they don't have to do that. So you could say that from a financial perspective, this is a smart deal on Newcastle's part. So you could take the positive end of that, and you could say he's an England goalkeeper, proven in the Premier League. We've probably seen the best of him, so you know the ceiling he can reach. Perhaps he can improve, but likely at that age, you know what the ceiling is. So you're getting a proven level of performance, but you don't have that kind of sheen of a James Trafford, where it's a young England under-21 goalkeeper who's been called into the senior squad. The expectation is that he can potentially be the long-term successor to Jordan Pickford. What level can he attain? You know, all those questions of development, which make him the easier sell to the supporters, but the harder buy from the selling club. And you have to say that Newcastle's preference was clearly to take Trafford, so they've gone for the second level option here. As we mentioned, they were also interested in Chevalier, who's ended up at the European Champions. But that's not to say that it's a terrible deal from their perspective, but it doesn't look great against the context of this window in which they have failed for Liam Delap, failed for Brian Mbeumo, failed for multiple Jean Pedro, another striker that they've failed to secure, and as we've talked in this podcast in some detail, got themselves in a horrendous position with their best player, Alexander Isak.
Yeah, it seems to be a long summer for Newcastle that's not ending. But like you said, yeah, Aaron Ramsdale, he's a reliable player. He's a good player. He's just not that exciting name that you want your club to sign when you're being linked with a Hugh Ekitike or a João Pedro or whoever. A reliable goalkeeper is all well and good, but fans want the exciting name, the player that makes them stand up off their chairs when they're watching the match. And I'm not sure your goalkeeper does that too often. Another team that have been making moves in the goalkeeper market is Barcelona. They've given Johan Garcia the number 1 shirt, which has not pleased their former number 1, Marc-André Ter Stegen, who has had an injury-plagued season last season and kind of didn't get back into the manager's good graces and is not seen as a huge part of Hansi Flick's plans for the future.
Yeah, look, there's some parallels here because Johan Garcia, Arsenal wanted to sign Garcia from Espanyol last summer, went quite a long way down the line with that deal. The player wanted to come. Espanyol referred Arsenal to the release clause in his contract, and they basically had been led to believe by the player's agents that they could get him for a lot less money than that. So the deal eventually fell through. Barcelona have since taking the player from their city rivals and installed him as someone who's expected to hold the Barcelona number 1 shirt for years, and has been given it, taken from Marc-André Ter Stegen, German goalkeeper, who they've been trying to offload for some time now. As you say, some serious injury problems last season, and underwent back surgery in the last few days. What's unusual about this situation is that Barcelona, as ever, are struggling to make room on their salary bill to sign new players, including Marcus Rashford, to register them with La Liga. And one of the tactics they were hoping to employ was to use Ter Stegen's surgery as a way to allow them to use 80% of his salary on registering new players. Why? Because under the La Liga rulebook, if a player is expected to be out for 4 months or more, then the majority of his salary can be removed from the accounts and then redeployed on a different player. So that all looked good for Barcelona. Surgery takes place, and then Ter Stegen, who does not want to leave Barcelona, goes on Twitter and posts a very precise timescale for his expected recovery. And how long do you think that expected recovery is going to be, according to Ter Stegen's post, Ronan?
Is it 3 months and 29 days?
It is 3 months, yes. So, so unless Barcelona can persuade La Liga that Ter Stegen is mistaken on that expected recovery timetable, then their unwanted goalkeeper has caused them a secondary problem of not helping them register new players, which may or may not assist Ter Stegen in getting out of the club if he's being forced to leave the club at a far cheaper rate.
Well, who wants to buy a goalkeeper who's injured for 4 months? A goalkeeper that's injured only for 3 months, you might have interest in. But a goalkeeper who's injured for 4 months, maybe not. That rules him out for the rest of 2025. So, yeah, a lot of the rest of 2025. Yeah, we're in August now, so yeah, it does. So yeah, you want your goalkeepers to be fit. You want to sign them. So maybe Mark is thinking of his next club rather than his current club when he's making statements like that.
Certainly a lack of communication between the two parties, and as we've often seen with Barcelona, a bit of a messy situation.
Yeah, often we see that players are too PR coached these days, and they give the most boring answers. But then we get something like this, and I think, yeah, it's the more the merrier. We like to see this sort of drama played out a bit more in public. The last topic we have of transfers is Jorel Hato as to Chelsea, and it seems to be kind of picking up steam now at the moment.
Yeah, that the terms of that deal have been agreed between the clubs. Hato had already agreed financial conditions on a contract until 2032 with Chelsea. As I said, a player who Liverpool were extremely keen on, had direct conversations with Ajax earlier in the window before deciding to focus their energies at centre-back, which has become a priority position for Liverpool because of injuries, on Crystal Palace's Marc Guéhi, who wants to join Liverpool, I understand. Hato will, I think, without knowing the exact details of the bonuses agreed, the guaranteed fee that Ajax will receive, which I understand is going to be 46.5 million euros with variable payments on top, looks like one that's gone in Chelsea's favour. My understanding is that Ajax could have received more than that if they'd sold to another Premier League club last summer, and certainly the target figure that Ajax went into this summer as a valuation on Hato was over 60 million euros. So this looks, if Chelsea can develop the player in the right fashion, and he certainly fits a gap they have at the rear end of their team, it looks like this is a clever bit of transfer business by Chelsea, who also managed to extract 50 million euros from Saudi Arabia for João Felix during the week, selling him to Al Nassr for initial fee of 30 million euros. But what I'm told is that the bonus structure in that is so straightforward that the 50 million is essentially guaranteed. He was close to moving to Benfica, who offered 25 million euros for 50% of his rights, and then an obligatory purchase of a further 20% for 10 million euros down the line. And Benfica are very unhappy that Felix eventually chose to go and play alongside Cristiano Ronaldo at Al Nassr for the coming season. And one other little bit of news that we should update on, because we've talked a lot about Ilya Zabarnyi over the last few months, is that Paris Saint-Germain are now confident of completing an agreement with Bournemouth for the transfer of the Ukraine centre-back. They've had personal terms agreed with the 22-year-old for several months now. Bournemouth had accepted a proposal of 70 million euros from Tottenham, which should have been a club record fee. And owner Bill Foley had been pushing Bournemouth's technical staff to achieve a club record fee for Zabarnyi, but my understanding is their efforts to persuade the player to move to Tottenham instead of Paris Saint-Germain have failed, and that deal should go through now, and he will join the European champions instead of the Europa League holders.
Well, very nice. I can see why you'd get to play in the Champions League regardless of which team you want. But yeah, I think playing for PSG at the moment is maybe more appealing for most players than playing for Tottenham. But yeah, it should be a big move for him. And yeah, Bournemouth's defence is going to look completely different now for the 2025-26 season, because it's a totally different defence that we're going to see in the Premier League.
Yeah, lost Dean Howson, lost Milos Kerkez, lost Zabarnyi. There is a big recruitment job to go on there, although they have made a good signing at left back in the French defender Adrien Truffert.
Yeah, it should be a good addition to the Premier League, and from what Robin Berner has told me personally, that he's very excited to see how he performs in the Premier League, and he's confident that he should be a success at Bournemouth. So onwards and upwards for Bournemouth. Time for our hero and villain. I'm not sure if you're allowing me to pick the hero or villain this week, because the decision I made a few weeks ago. So what would you like, Duncan? And I will take the other one.
I was going to go for the villain this week, and it is going to be Saudi Arabia for their general influence on European football, world football at present. We wait to see what damage the Club World Cup is going to do to this European season. Club World Cup obviously funded by the Saudis, and with that $1 billion television deal that they bailed FIFA out with when they didn't have a communications partner. You also saw the Public Investment Fund, PIF, being one of the title sponsors for the tournament. Just to give one example, we've just mentioned Paris Saint-Germain. Paris Saint-Germain, in dealing with having to play a months-long tournament in the United States immediately after finishing the European season and winning the Champions League, they've decided that they would give their players 3 weeks holiday from whenever they returned from the tournament. They had the frustration and irony of losing to Chelsea in the final and then not being able to fly home for an additional 2 days because of bad weather in the New York region. But if you run those 3 weeks holidays through, they start training again on Wednesday, and they are then expected to play Tottenham Hotspur in the UEFA Super Cup 7 days later, and their first Ligue 1 fixture against Nantes the following Saturday. So they're going to be going into whichever one you decide is the proper start of competition, but they're going to be going into it with either 7 days or 10 days of pre-season preparation. And obviously there are other clubs in a scenario they've never dealt with before. And I think a huge expectation of injuries, and I think a worry about what level of football we'll get. PSG played the best football in the world last season, the most attractive football. They won everything in the European game. But I think it's fair to say they won't be properly prepared for the defence of those titles. You have FIFA currently going to war in a public slanging match with the Players Union FIFPro over that Club World Cup and over various considerations of their failure to protect players' welfare. I think you just look at the transfer market this summer, where we've had fees inflating for some of the top clubs, and you can just chart that back again to that $1 billion that Saudi Arabia threw into the market, and that UEFA and European sides took the best part of €500 million of the prize pot provided by the Saudis, and that direct injection of money is going into the top end of the transfer market and will have ramifications down the line. And then you also look at players like Nantes centre-back Nathan Zeze, who I understand was an option for Bournemouth as a replacement for those centre-backs they've lost to two of Europe's top clubs, and would have been interesting to see in the Premier League, given Bournemouth's demonstrated ability to pick out top-level young centre-backs like Zabarnyi and Howson and give them a platform to develop. So Zeze instead has just joined newly promoted Saudi Pro League club Neom for an initial €20 million, transfer fee not out of kilter with his worth. In fact, almost exactly on SciSports estimated transfer value for the France under-21 international. The interesting thing is the salary there, which I understand to be close to €5 million net for the 20-year-old, and at least 5 times what he was offered for an equivalent deal at Villarreal, which were another club who were trying to sign him in and developing it in his career. And I think we're going to see more of that. Could be that Zeze's development in the Saudi Pro League goes unhindered. He turns into the level of player he would have done regardless. But I think the expectation can be that he would have improved further as a player if he'd moved to La Liga, stayed in Liga, or gone to the Premier League.
Yeah, and where he's gone, if you're not familiar with it, have a look for Neom. Look it up, and it's a place that doesn't even exist yet. It's a fascinating planned future city, as well as being with the audio commentary for Formula 1. Neom. Yeah.
Very good, Ronan.
Yeah. You're welcome. You're welcome, everyone. But you've said a lot there, but the main thing I heard was that Tottenham Hotspur are going to win the UEFA Super Cup. That's the main point I'm taking from it.
They have certainly got a better chance than they would have had there been no Club World Cup. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. My hero for the week is going to be, I'm reluctant to say, the England ladies team, the England women. Congratulations to them on winning the European Championship. A fantastic result for them. And yeah, as an Irishman, we're usually reluctant to praise the England national team for anything, but fair play to them for winning another European title. Congratulations. Aside from that, if I'm not just going to pick the England women, because I might be exiled as an Irish person if I just stick with that, I'm picking the club football. I've mentioned international football, but club football is back. It never went away for some people, but yeah, it's kind of back this evening because the Zweite Liga, the second Bundesliga, is back in Germany. So I'm very excited to see Schalke and Hertha BSC, Hertha Berlin kick off things for the return of German club football. Well, the lower divisions were back last week, but yeah, this is the professionals are back this week, and I'm looking forward to having some German football back on my TV again.
That's real dedication, Ronan. Getting ready for the second division of the Bundesliga and being excited about it. I'm thoroughly impressed.
Yeah, well, I've had League of Ireland to keep me company for the summer usually, but yeah, now I have even more television time for myself, and much to annoy my wife. If she made it to this stage of the show, she knows fill in the audience survey. The link is in our show notes and on our social media platforms. As well as that, we've got the Football Transfers app where you can download and get the latest news, rumours, transfer done deals straight to your phone. Yeah, as always. And yeah, thanks very much, Duncan. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Ronan.
You've been listening to the Transfers podcast powered by FootballTransfers.com. If you liked what you heard, spread the word. Please follow, share and rate us. You can message us on Instagram, YouTube and Facebook at Transfers Podcast. Our Twitter, Blue Sky and TikTok address is at TransfersCast. I'm on Twitter at SwearingNotPaul, Instagram at GoalRonan, Blue Sky at Ronan Murphy and Duncan is everywhere at Duncan Castles. Our production is by Mark Caulfield at Pro Podcast Production and our music is by Mark Caulfield and David L. Stay safe, be well and thank you for listening.
He did the transfer window. Ian McGarry, who left us and wasn't known for a couple of years. Duncan was old. Now he's back with a new show. It's called The Transfers. It's where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go.